Well, welcome to the final Principles newsletter for Semester 1. If you commenced your studies with us this semester, I hope it's been rewarding and left you desiring more. For those of you that have finished, well, congratulations, and we look forward to hearing what you're doing in the future. But just as we finish this first semester, I wanted to reflect on a topic of great importance for us as followers of Christ, and that's actually the topic of forgiveness. You might think it's unusual to want to explore this theme of forgiveness in a theological college, but I believe it's important for our character as well as an important topic not only for us to explore intellectually. So we need to develop both our intellect and our character as we pursue further studies in both vocational and higher education. Now, being a specialist of the Old Testament, it's important to think about how forgiveness is explored in both parts of the Bible, not just what Jesus says about it, but also what the Old Testament has to say about this topic of forgiveness. And what we find is that the topic of forgiveness is actually modeled for us in the narrative. Because when we come to the Old Testament, we see that there's actually no law about forgiveness. We're not told, "Thou shalt forgive thy brother or sister." We're not told in explicit instructions on this important theme. But instead what we are given are models of forgiveness. So because the law cannot determine your heart, the law cannot give you a instruction to follow in your own internal motivation or heart's desire. And so we see the law is all about outward behavior. But what we see modeled throughout the narrative is the importance of how outward behavior is a reflection of the state of our hearts. So we see forgiveness is an important theme, but it's primarily expressed through the narrative, through the stories. And I believe that that can be even more powerful than a law, because if we're just told forgive one another and not given examples of what that means, then that leaves that very unclear for us. And so we have modeled for us in the Old Testament examples of forgiveness. One of the most common examples we can look at is the figure of Joseph. We see that Joseph had been through a horrific experience and was essentially abandoned in a foreign land. But we see that he learns the power of forgiveness as he forgives his brothers and models for us what a follower of God should be. But of course, the primary model of forgiveness in the Old Testament is God himself. Because we see the majority of times anyone functions as the forgiver in the Bible, and in the Old Testament in particular, we see that it is actually God. God continually expresses his forgiveness to ancient Israel for their rejection of him or abandonment of his ways. And so we see that when we come to the New Testament, it's Jesus himself that picks up, Jesus, God incarnate, who picks up this important theme of forgiveness. And he emphasizes not only his ability to forgive sins, which demonstrates his divinity, but also encourages his followers to model and to mirror the very behavior and this very ethic of God, of forgiveness. And so we see he encourages his disciples to forgive not just once or twice, but 70 times 7, a ludicrous figure, basically meaning always forgive. Because an important development in the New Testament is this idea that we are to model after God. If God is holy, then we're to be holy. And what Jesus emphasizes that we don't get as much in the Old Testament is that if God is forgiving, then we need to be forgiving people as well. And so God demonstrates his forgiveness in his lavish mercy, and Jesus displayed that on the cross. And so therefore we can have full peace and full restoration through that act of forgiveness that Christ worked on the cross. And so forgiveness is an important value and an important action that God himself models for us through Jesus Christ. But just in the final thoughts about this is the importance of us forgiving others. In the Christian walk, it's guaranteed that you'll be hurt by other people. And what's interesting is that the writer to the Hebrews in chapter 3 reminds them to not harden their hearts as the people in the Old Testament did in the wilderness during the Exodus event. And he's specifically talking about not hardening their hearts towards God. But I guess what I want to encourage us is to not harden our hearts towards God's people. That when we're hurt, which we will be, when we're misunderstood, which we will be, we're told to be quick to forgive one another. And because if we don't forgive, our hearts can be hardened towards that other person, and that makes forgiveness even more difficult. And so I want to encourage you as you are on break, or as you are continuing studying with the intensives, that as you have some time out to reflect upon these important elements of your own character, to encourage you to be people that mirror God, and that is one of being a merciful and a forgiving person, modelled after Jesus Christ, being followers of him as we exemplify what his values are, one of forgiveness. Thanks. I hope you have a great fortnight.